is one of us and has been asked to speak again as she approaches her retirement. We'll talk about the lessons she has learned about our community and our current challenges from her amazing vantage point of 34 years of service. She will respond to the questions, how are we doing? Where are we going? What have we learned? She is the first woman to hold the position of President and CEO of the United Way of Dane County in the 93-year history of the organization. During her tenure as president, she organized, the organization has increased its annual campaign from $5.5 million to over $24 million in total revenue, and has transformed itself into a grant-making agency that also effectively changes the human condition. Leslie was born in Easton near Allentown, Pennsylvania, and attended Lafayette College there, where she received her undergraduate degree in psychology in 1976, and then she left. You told me, well, you were the first of your family since the Revolution to actually leave that town. And she said they still think she's coming back. But she's now a Wisconsinite. As she said, she's learned to say we when she refers to the Packers rather than they. It takes us all a while to make that transition sometimes if we're from another place, but you have to dance with the one you brung, I guess, and it's a good team. Leslie was born, as you know there, and then moved on to UW-Madison, where she got a master's degree in social work in 4 years later. And she's recognized as a community leader and has received the YWCA Women of Distinction Award, the Distinguished Social Worker Award from the South Central Wisconsin branch of the National Association of Social Workers, the President's Award from the Urban League of Greater Madison. In 2014, the Jeffrey Clay Erlinger Civility and Public Discourse Award from the City of Madison, the Award of Excellence from 100 Black Men of Madison, and the Lifetime Achievement Award for Innovation from Madison Magazine's Best in Business. She was recognized as one of Madison's most influential individuals, one of Dane County's top executives, and one of Madison's Women on Top, all by Madison Magazine. And as of October 1, as I think you know, Leslie will become CEO, has become, I guess, it's after the first, and Renee became president of United Way of Dane County and will become president and CEO January 1st. So, we're here. So Leslie, it's an honor for us to share the room with you today. Thank you for coming.
I don't know if I can do this. Thank you, President Ellsworth. I also want to thank Pat Jenkins, who just stepped out, I guess, for telling me what to wear today. We both have the exactly same color on. Thank you, Pat. She's always on top of things. Hi, everybody. First, I want to thank Jim Ruley, I think, but I don't see him here today. That was a. There he is. There he is. Okay, in the back. For asking me a year ago to think about talking to the club near the end of my tenure. At the time, it seemed like a really good idea. But as the date approached, I became much more overwhelmed about how to approach today, trying to figure out what you might want to hear or what might be of interest to you, what's meaningful, what you really want to hear from me. I'm not so sure. So I asked a number of people what I should really focus on today, and I'm so grateful to Dick Goldberg, Floyd Rose, Steve Goldberg, I don't know if he's here, and Renee for offering me their perspective and for all the questions that I received as I was preparing. It's funny, the first thing that several people advised was, don't make a direct ask. Now, would I do that? Have I ever done that? Okay. So that's over with. Well, Terry Anderson, our program chair, recommended that I lean towards philosophical and reflective. What wisdom do you have to share? That sounded fun, but honestly, if I think about it that way, I feel like I don't know anything. It might be too soon. I might still be too close to it to really have the perspective. But then I started looking at the questions that people sent me, and it started to gel. What lessons have you learned? What lesson did you learn early in your career that helped you most during your tenure? What have you learned about the Madison community as CEO of United Way, and how has it changed? I know things. I'll never tell. Like who knits and who likes lemon martinis. and other things. What's the worst, funniest, most difficult, greatest thing that happened during your tenure? A lot of those I can't talk about, and I won't be writing a book. What has shaped your thinking, your determination, your grit, your style? First and foremost, I have so much to be grateful for. All the people who have helped along the way, everyone who said yes. I can't think of anyone saying no to what we asked of them, and that's what made all the difference. Especially to our incoming President and CEO, Renee Moe, who is willing to take on this job when she knows full well what it entails. Could we please thank Renee again for taking that on? And Gary and Rich are here today. Thanks so much for the work you've done to help us and to continue to help us with the transition that we're going through together. But before I answer those questions and the questions that maybe you have on your mind, I want to start by asking you to reflect on a few questions. If I asked you, do you think we could eliminate homelessness? Not just for some individuals, but can you envision a scenario where we would substantially reduce or maybe eliminate homelessness? Do you think that's possible? Some people are shaking their heads yes. Or do you think we could eliminate the racial achievement gap in our schools? Again, not just for some children, but for across all districts and all schools and all the states in our country. Or if I told you we could get a family on the pathway out of poverty for $3,600, would you believe me? You know, some of you are shaking your heads, but I'm thinking in your heart of hearts, you would say no. You might be skeptical. So that caused me to think about where I get my optimism and fortitude about how change is necessary and how change is possible. And that took me to thinking about my dad. My father was an alcoholic, and for the first 20 years of my life, I experienced what many, many others have, growing up in an environment of broken promises, lies, disappointments, fear, grief, and anger. I don't need to spell it out. But then something miraculous happened. Sobriety. And as I started college, my dad entered a program at age 44, and for the last 32 years of his life, he was sober. He passed away in 2005 at the age of 76. And what I realized when writing his eulogy was that of all the things my dad taught me, how to cut the grass, throw a football, play basketball, and get to work on time, the most profound thing he taught me was, it's never too late to change. And I think that profound and significant and hard-fought lesson on his part formed the basis of my belief that people, circumstances, conditions can change. And maybe most importantly, it's never too late. That's lesson number one. So while my dad was struggling and winning his battle, I was entering college. Clicker. Thanks, Jane. I attended Lafayette, as you heard, beginning in '72, and Lafayette had just gone co-ed. And like many men's engineering schools, this was a really big deal. The whole process of bringing women in, changing the culture, helping male students think about their female counterparts as something other than activity for pub night, and assuring that women had equal experience and opportunity was the challenge of the day. This was lost on me at the time. I always had lots of guy friends, and I ran with the guys, as you would expect. So the social political dynamics of changing campus and the challenge to women to succeed in that environment really didn't cross my mind. The administration was very diligent in its efforts to make everything available to women. So one night when I was doing laundry, I noticed a flyer recruiting a manager for the varsity men's football team, male or female. I love football, and of course, except for Powder Puff football, I wouldn't be able to play, so it sounded fun. I inquired. Long story short, they accepted me. And and people always ask, why am I squinting? I was too vain to wear my glasses, and someone called my name, and I turned around, and I was squinting. So that's me. You see, I have my glasses on now. So they accepted me, and what ensued was probably the best education that I could have ever received in how to compete with and work with men. In addition, it turns out I was the first woman manager of a varsity men's football team in the country. So when the athletic department figured this out, it was all over the papers. Now, this attention was not something that I sought or expected, and it did challenge my relationships with the players for a time. But in the end, I got to be part of the team, even in the locker room, and that was really yucky. And I earned my stripes, and I was 17, earned my stripes by doing every dirty, difficult, crazy job they threw my way. Repairing equipment, keeping up the water supply, tying the premier running backs shoelaces until they were down to nubs because he was superstitious about them. He had 1,000 yards that year, and I helped with that. Tony Gilio, I'll never forget him. Videotaping practice from atop a 3-story scaffolding in high winds until dark, fixing shoulder pads, fetching footballs, and graciously accepting gifts from the opposing team who were curious to see, with their own eyes, a woman on the sidelines. Imagine that. One particularly embarrassing moment came after I was videotaping practice atop that 3-story scaffolding, strung to a telephone pole on a November day. It was cold and windy. It was terrible. With the other manager, Stan Johnson. You can see Stan standing on the bench behind me there. Remember, it was 1972, so we weren't very video savvy. It was cold and windy, and darkness was coming on. The next day, on the way to the field, as I passed all the coaches, each of them said with a smirk, "So how's your boyfriend? Things okay with your boyfriend?" Whoops. I didn't realize that while we were videotaping, we were also audio taping. And I was sharing all my boyfriend woes with Stan. All of the coaches enjoyed this immensely while they were watching the practice tapes the night before. In the end, I learned that anything I wanted to do was open to me. I also learned not to back down in the most masculine of male environments. Being part of a football team teaches you how to win together. But come sophomore year, I had to decide if I wanted to continue to help the guys play a sport that they loved, or did I want to explore competition myself. And so I joined the newly formed women's softball team. Here I'm pitching. You can see we're wearing jeans and polo shirts. I mean, there was not a lot of money for the women's teams at that time. And I also joined the women's swimming team. But I will ever cherish the opportunity that Lafayette afforded me to break some barriers. Maybe for some women coming after me, but certainly for myself, because really after my Lafayette locker room experience, I no longer had any limitations in my consciousness due to my gender, and that was lesson number 2. There are many, many people, places, and things that have shaped me, but these 2 were very, very significant. So then how is it with this personal belief system you take the next step to operationalize this belief in the possibility of change into one's organizations or one's community? Because that's really what I think I've tried to do here. This change process really started for me at United Way around 2 issues. And some of you have heard this story, some of you know it. The voice of our donors and an unexpected opportunity. First, I started hearing from our donors, and they were saying, United Way, you're back every year, and you're telling us the needs are greater, and we believe you, and we don't like it. Isn't it your job to reduce and eliminate the underlying causes of these needs? Yes, we've got some people working with me nodding their heads. Isn't it your job to eliminate the underlying causes of these needs? That's what we want and expect from you. And frankly, my first reaction was, wow, I love our donors, but isn't that naive? They're asking us to change the human condition. I know how hard it is to change one person's life, let alone the human condition. At the same time, we had the opportunity to work on an issue at scale that caused us to think maybe our donors were right. And there's some people in the room who were very instrumental in this. This is a historical chart of the genesis of our change. It shows 3rd grade reading scores below standard by racial group from 1991 to 2005. The Wisconsin State Journal, thank you Phil Blake and Andy Hall, and WISC and the school district asked us how to help address the issues of racial disparities in 3rd grade reading. After pulling together all the stakeholders, especially our partner Enos Ragland and 100 Black Men, and working with research and best practices, we had 16 professors from the University of Wisconsin helping us. We employed strategies of smaller class size, consistent curriculum, teacher training, in-class assessments, and trained tutors working in concert with the classroom teacher. And you can see that 3 years ahead of plan, below standard reading scores were dropping. So my husband said, you have to tell people, the chart going down in this is good because these are below standard scores. Now these strategies were crucial to our success, but as important was something called self-fulfilling prophecy. It was very apparent to me at the time that when we started working on this, that the prevailing attitude in our community and maybe in our country was that students of color have so many problems, there's no way they can do well in our schools. By taking up this charge to bring hope, support, and necessary change to our work, we as a community were making a statement, and a statement we need to make again, and then proving the point that in spite of circumstances, we have a responsibility and an ability to help all of our children succeed. These results caused our board to challenge us to think about changing how we work. And those of you that have been around a while may remember we were in the process of moving from our old building on Atwood Avenue and creating a new facility next door. Angela Bartell was our board chair at the time. That was fun, wasn't it, Angie? Our old building was not handicap accessible. Some old capped off pipes from sinks that were there from when visiting nurse services were there burst, and we had waterfalls inside the walls of the building. And Gary, this one, I don't know if you remember this, but a woman touched a telephone pole out in front of the building, and she got a shock so severe it split the soles of her shoes, although she was not hurt. But that was kind of the last straw. So it was out with the old building and out with the old United Way. We learned some things from our work with Schools of Hope, which is what our work in third grade reading came to be called. It taught us we could make change at scale, address problems at a different level, and introduce new competencies. Now, I want to be clear, we saw progress at that time in one area of the achievement gap, but there was then and still is a lot of work to be done. We didn't solve the issue, but it gave us encouragement to change our approach. If you look at our core competencies, and I'm not going to even go over those on the left, that's what you know about United Way, but we could build on those. Involving the community in setting the agenda by having the State Journal and WISC involved was crucial to what we were doing. Having the community understand the scope and the dimension and the difficulty of the issues we're dealing with. Community will is tremendously powerful. Being organized around vision rather than service category or need area. You know in your own business, in your own organization, what an impact it makes when you're able to set goals and have a vision and move forward in that way. Measuring the success of the human condition. You know, what do you think of with United Way? Our measurement has been our thermometer. Well, we're not a fundraising organization. I'm going to say that again. We're not a fundraising organization. We're aiming to change the human condition. Please forgive me if I didn't get that done during my tenure. Also at scale, working at scale was something we learned, and using best practices and research. We talked about the professors we had involved. This is very unusual in the social sector and has been, and getting research and best practices to determine how we work on things is very important. And finally, agency leadership. You know, one of the things that's happened, and this is something that Marv Levy and I've talked about quite a bit, what's the unique role of the nonprofit sector? Doing things that government can't do and doing things the private sector can't do. You know, nonprofit sector in some ways has become a low-cost service provider of government, not through anybody's ill design, but it's really not what we're here for. We're here to be a catalyst for change. And a lot of my partners are here today, Bill Greer, Jeff Burkhart, Rachel, Oscar, I think, is over here, who are really helping us get back to that unique role for the nonprofit sector. So what came out of this was our agenda for change. You've got a little card on your table if you want to take that with you. Our aspirations now met the expectations that donors laid out for us. It's more difficult and qualitatively different than our work before. It's a difference between providing quality shelter for 100 people and reducing the rate of homelessness by 50% over 5 years. And many days I sat at my desk wondering, why did I make my job so much harder than it was before? And truly, it's much harder, Renee, but you're going to love it. You can see the goals coalesce around a couple areas. 2 in education, dealing with addressing reading, algebra completion, high school graduation, kindergarten readiness, and behavioral health. 2 in income, addressing poverty and family homelessness. And 2 in health, addressing senior independence and access to health care. I don't have time to go into all the areas, obviously, but I want to touch on 3 that I think are relevant: homelessness, recidivism, and early childhood. When I moved to Madison in 1977, leaving the East Coast, virtually all the homeless in our community were single adult men. Now 50% are women with children. As we studied this area, we found that if you enter a shelter, you only have a 37% chance of ever getting out of the shelter system. Versus, if we can keep you in your apartment or home and provide aggressive case management, even if we subsidize you for a year, there's an 80% success rate, and it's half the cost of shelter. That's surprising. So we've shifted our work from shelter to housing first, a much more successful model. And I want to say, and Paul's not here, but to my partner, Paul Soglin, just to support him in the work he's trying to do now, in no way, shape, or form are tent cities or benches an answer to homelessness. Next one. This is an area I wasn't sure we should even work on. When we started, around 600 to 700 people were released from prison back to their homes in Dane County each year. As we looked at it, within 2 years, 66% of those people were reoffending. You know, when you think about being released from prison and the movies we see, where someone drives a car into the middle of the desert and the prisoner gets out and the person drives away and there they stand, that's very much what it's like to try to re-enter society once you've been incarcerated. We also realized that how much crime was being committed by a small group of people. So if we wanted to improve safety, this was important. We know we can always do better, but our crime rates have dropped substantially. We're one of the safest cities in the country. We worked on, and our work with Journey Home through Madison Urban Ministry really parallels that success. With support in employment, housing, and treatment through Journey Home, we've driven the rate of recidivism down from 66% to 19%. And think of the return on investment. The cost of maintaining someone in prison is, I have $38,000 here, and I think it's more than that now, versus $500 a year for Journey Home. And that doesn't include the savings to our community in reduced crime. The last area I want to touch on is early childhood. In my 30 years in this work, I've often been asked, what is the most important thing we need to do? What would make the biggest difference? What would be a game changer? And my answer has always been the same. Whether to address hunger, homelessness, violence, unemployment, or lack of education, it would be improve parenting. And now, in contrast to very little evidence in the past, over the last decade or so, there's much more scientific evidence to focus us on that. I think we had Depeche here, Dr. Navsaria, speaking to us about that. The reason we need to start earlier is because these disparities start early. Gaps are evident as early as 18 months, and they grow wider from there without intervention. In fact, some children are as much as 2 years behind by the time they are 5 years old and entering kindergarten. There are 2 pieces of data that I think illustrate this best. Children from literacy-poor homes are read to 25 hours before they enter kindergarten versus children from literacy-rich homes who are read to 1,000 hours before they enter kindergarten. Another study shows that children from lower-income homes enter kindergarten with an 800-word vocabulary versus children from middle-income homes who enter kindergarten with a 10,000-word vocabulary. Some children have heard 30 million more words by the time they're 3 than their counterparts. Think about how that feels to a child entering school or childcare. Do you think they need to be told that they're behind? If there's one thing I want you to remember from today, it's that we have to impact a child's developing brain early, before the age of 3. If we don't, it is so much more difficult to catch up. A very promising approach to address these gaps, the Parent-Child Home Program, is an evidence-based strategy that focuses on the parent-child interaction, reaching developmental milestones, and language growth. The program targets low-income children, 2 years of age. Parent-Child Home has been researched and vetted. Remember, we talked about research and best practices. When families participate for 2 years, the children graduate from high school at the same rate as their middle-income peers. I'm going to say that again. You're right. When families participate for 2 years, the children graduate from high school at the same rate as their middle-income peers. And there they are, graduating. That's great. That's from Parent-Child Home, but then they also graduate from high school. So in the process of doing this work, what have I learned? I've got 5 highlights I'm going to run through very quickly for you. Actually, probably the most significant and elusive is captured in this quote from my friend Rich Hardward. I'm not actually putting it up on the board, but the greatest hidden factor in whether a community moves forward is its narrative. I think this is a significant way that Madison has changed in the time I've observed. Our narrative used to be, remember this, Kathleen? You can't get things done in Madison. That used to be what we said about being in Madison. I think that's changed. I think now we're in the mid-90s, mid to late 90s, and the narrative started to be we can and we will. Not that we're always succeeding, but we're going to. So if you're thinking about changing yourself, your organization, your community, think about that hidden factor, your narrative. The next one. Real change takes time, and you may want to write that down. This was a gem from Jim Burgess. And further, change and innovation are disruptive. We learned this through our work moving from shelter to housing first, right, Rachel? And it's still hard. You can often get people aligned around a problem, but not get them to agree on how the problem should be solved. Change requires disruption, alignment, and focus. Everyone assumes it's a lack of resources, and yes, resources are needed. But what's more profound is getting that alignment and focus on how the problem is to be solved. If you look at the results we're getting in early childhood, housing first, and prisoner reentry, as I just discussed, the key is getting to scale to make greater change. And the key to getting to scale is focus and alignment on how, and that takes time.
Leslie?
Yes?
What do you mean by
Getting to scale, meaning not just working in small programs to 50 kids here and there, but when you're trying to address the achievement gap or homelessness, really trying to move everyone in that category. So that's changing, again, back to the human condition and reducing and eliminating the underlying causes like our donors ask us to. Thank you for asking that question. Okay, if you're working on organizational transformation, you've experienced this one. Remember I remember very clearly when I was briefing our executive committee as we were going through this change and towards the agenda for change, and they asked me how it was going. You should have seen their eyes when I described it this way. We're driving the car while we're building it, and we're going around a corner very fast. I hope the car will hold together. That's the reality, especially where you're in the service sector. You have to have a strong enough organization to keep the core going and at the same time change while you're in motion. The next one, probably the hardest thing about my job. Anytime someone was unhappy or didn't understand what we were trying to do. When you have the variety of stakeholders we're working to bring together, this happened a few times. Another gem from Jim Burgess. If you're doing your job, you're going to make someone unhappy every week. And I think I exceeded that benchmark. But the best thing about my job, what always felt like a great accomplishment, anytime people came together and put aside their self-interests for the common good. What I learned was, no matter how mad people get, you eventually have to come back to the table. Those were good days. People want to change the world, and they want to make a difference. And everybody is struggling in some way in their own lives. And still, they want to help somebody else. They want to help the community. They do it, and they sacrifice, and it's humbling. I want to pull this back to my dad to finish up. I mentioned my dad's passing in 2005 and the realization of his teaching when writing his eulogy. My dad's funeral packed the church with 500 to 600 people, most of whom I didn't know. We have a very small family. I'm an only child. Hundreds of people came up to me after the service to say, "Your dad meant the world to me. Your dad saved my life. Your dad changed my life." All were people I came to understand that he quietly, confidently, gracefully, and effectively sponsored in their sobriety. It's never too late to change. Thank you, Dad. Thanks to all of you for your service, your friendship, and for your attention today. Do you have time?
Sure.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay. Nancy.
Leslie, thank you so much. I always love it when I hear you talk because I get excited about your vision and your energy, and I know we're in for a good many years with Renee, too.
Yes.
The piece that I want to focus on is about the parenting issue that you spoke about, and that the parenting is the answer to the improved academic success of children. For many years, I think we've known this, and we've, in the schools, felt rather helpless about how to address it because it's a very sensitive issue. And I'm wondering how you would recommend that the whole community join you with that issue and really talk about the parenting and get to the parents who most need to be tutored.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in some ways we're there. I mean, I think as a community we recognize this. There are a lot more people talking about it. I mean, 30 years ago, you couldn't even talk about helping people with parenting. And now I think the recognition is we all need help with our parenting. I mean, there's other issues also in terms of literacy, but also with behavioral health. I mean, Bill, we can talk about those issues. So I think it's recognizing, Nancy, that it's even bigger, though, than that. As we're working with families and looking at what needs to happen, we're seeing the need to pull together housing, employment, and early childhood support, and recognizing and understanding that the situations and circumstances that these families are in. So yes, the children and the parents need help supporting each other with their interactions and so forth, but the family also needs help from all of us with employment and housing. So I think it's respectfully bringing those three things together that's going to make the biggest difference for people who are poor in our community to really get on that pathway out of poverty. So I think it's marrying those three things.
What about the families who aren't poor but still don't get it?
You know, I guess I would say I think everybody gets it. I think the issue is whether or not people have the time, people are working 4 and 5 jobs, much of the working poor. It's making it available, accessible, having people that, African American, Latino, and Southeast Asian people helping us deliver these programs so that there's cultural competency in it. Being in the neighborhoods where those services are needed. I think there are ways to do it, and I think we're trying to implement those.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe this is the same question. But the doctor we had, who spoke about the critical importance of early education.
Yeah, Depeche, yes.
And what you just said about early education, the change it makes in people if you get them at 2 years old. Specifically, how can we support that idea of early education for very, very young children?
Go home and love your family.
Well, that's just us. What about?
Okay, that's the place to start. You know, the big thing about cortisol, which is what Depeche talked about, is when a child's under stress, which can be caused by all kinds of things. It says that cortisol can be, it evaporates if the child is hugged. So something as simple as hugging a child can make all the difference in the world for that child's brain to be then open and available to learning what he or she needs to learn. So I think learning about this, doing what we can within our own families, with our grandchildren, our children, and we've got volunteer opportunities at United Way where you can sign up and get involved in these programs. We need home visitors for the early childhood program, you'll be trained. We need help tutoring in the schools. So I would say learn about the programs, help your families, help your children, hug your children, read to them, have them sitting on your lap, and then volunteer for United Way. And I don't think I should have to pay for that one.
One more question.
Okay, Oscar.
Well, Leslie, I know we haven't always agreed on everything. I know we've bumped heads a couple times. I think on behalf of our community, we want to thank you for your love of our community, your strong will to help us get through those difficult paths. And I think you really touch each and every one of us in a different way. So thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. That means a lot.